What's good, mini crafters? My name's Samuel and we're back, baby. Last week we painted up these two badass minis and today I'm going to be making a diorama scene for them to face off in. And I'm going to be figuring out how to make a real spell for Big Thicky the Frost Beholder to be casting at Winnie. And I'm going to be showing you how I do this so that you can do it on your own projects to make your dioramas even better. Roll the intro. We're starting this build off with a wooden oval base. This is going to help give me some good parameters and dimensions to work inside of for this little scene. You know, to get my creative juices a-flowing. I'm laying out a variety of things that I may or may not use in this diorama. I have my trusty green XPS foam, a few rocks from the backyard, and cork too. I know that I want Winnie the Monster Hunter to be up on an elevated surface. This is not only going to keep the scene interesting to look at, but it's also going to let her get a good shot off at Big Thicky. I don't know where Big Thicky came from, the name. I just started calling him that, so I guess that's his name. After penciling in some lines on the foam, I'm going to be using my handheld hot wire foam cutter tool to cut out my desired shape. And from there, I use hot glue to glue it in place on the wooden base. This is going to serve as that ledge that I'm planning to have Winnie standing on. And with the foam ledge placed, I decide to move to create a partially destroyed wooden structure. Now, in last week's video, which I'll have linked below, I mentioned that Winnie received notice of a beholder wrecking havoc on a little town up north. I want this diorama to showcase some of that destruction. Now, to make this, I'm going to be taking balsa wood and texturing that with my wire brush and a sharp metal tool to give it some wooden grain. I then apply the same texture to a balsa wood plank, which I then snap into a few different pieces. I glue the balsa wood together in a sort of lean-to structure, adding support beams as well to showcase what a realistic building structure might look like if it was destroyed. Then I take those planks that I snapped in half and I glue those to the balsa beam. These broken, shattered ends definitely show destruction. Jumping back to my foam ledge, I need to texture this up a little bit to add some more detail. Now, I'm going to be using two methods here to get a convincing rock texture. The first one is simply taking my hobby knife and making a ton of horizontal slashes in the foam. I do some straight in, and then I also will come at the foam at an angle from above. This is going to give me slivers that I can then remove from the foam. And the second method here is with my wire brush. I'm going to rake that across the foam to not only slice more texture lines into the foam, but it's also going to help to remove any slivers that are loose but haven't been removed from the foam quite yet. After texturing the foam up, I'm not really satisfied with how abruptly it just ends. So to remedy this, I'm going to take some of those real rocks that I found outside, I'm going to hot glue those to the base of the ledge. This is going to help to make things look a little bit more natural. I think something that a lot of hobby people get stuck on, and maybe this is just me, is that once we start a project or we have a direction or a vision, we can't deviate from plan A. That we have to stick to our plan. But I often find myself having a new thought or idea in the middle of a project that I'm working on. And my default is to think, well, no, I already have a plan and I'll just do that. But the fun part of this hobby is experimenting and trying new things. And I didn't initially plan to add the real rocks to the foam ledge here. And while it might seem like a small addition, it just seemed to make more sense, and I think it ended up making it more visually interesting. Another thing that I'm doing here which deviates from my plan A is to add a sort of pond area. In my initial thought, this was going to be a strictly rocky, snowy diorama for these two minis to battle it out in. But as I work here, I'm thinking that it might be a bit too boring without having something going on in the middle of this little scene. So I'm taking a cork sheet and I'm cutting it to the size of the base and I'm gluing it to the base to give a little bit more elevation. I had a few of these white pebbles in my terrain drawer and I wanted to add them to the base of the ledge to look more like fallen rock or a pile of rubble. I started by putting down some PVA glue to get the bottom layer of rocks to stick in place. And then from there, I piled them up and hit them with some isopropyl alcohol and then my homemade scenic glue to lock all of those pebbles in place. If you want to learn how to make your own scenic glue, check out the video in the upper right hand corner. I cover everything that you're going to need, I show you how to make it, and I also offer a few tips and tricks that you can do with it. I'm also adding in some other bits like a rock against the left side of the wooden structure, fine ballast to the surface of the cork, and a few other wooden planks strewn about. This is the structure of the diorama done, but now I need to go back and get some terrain paste down to pull it all together before I prime everything up. The terrain paste that I'm going to be making here is going to be thicker than I normally make it. I'm adding plaster, matte Mod Podge, some tan paint, and a bit of water before mixing it all up. I'm then taking that and then using an old brush, I'm dabbing that into the sunken area against the shoreline where the cork meets the wooden base. With the paste still wet, I'm going to take some fine and medium ballast and I'm going to sprinkle that all over. This helps to create a natural looking progression of surface textures and materials like rubble. After priming everything in black, I then hit it with a zenithal highlight of white from above to pick out all of the details, shadows, and areas where light would be brighter and shadows would be darker. I'm starting the paint job with the wooden structure in case I get any of the color on the ground. That way, I can cover up any mistakes later on. To get a nice weathered, destroyed look for this wood, I'm going to be taking some of Vallejo's flat earth and applying that as a base coat for all the wood. Then, from there I'm going to thin down Vallejo's smoke and use that as a wash across all the wood to add some depth to the recesses and texture that wood up so we can see the wood grain that I added earlier. I also mixed up a lighter tan color and streaked that across one of the planks on the wooden building to give it a bit more variety rather than having them all be the same flat brown color. Then to finish the wood up, I'm going to hit all of it with a light, dry brushing of Citadel's Carrick stone to highlight the edges and give everything a little bit of contrast. Lots of painters, myself included, typically approach painting rocks and stones by applying a single base coat and then dry brushing on a layer or two and calling it done. With these though, I want to show the environment they are in through color tones and color temperature. To convey the fact that this scene is in a cold northern area, I'm going to be base coating all of my stones with a mix of Vallejo's flat blue and Citadel's Abaddon black to give me this nice, cool, dark blue stone color. To further add to the cold environment that I'm trying to create, I added in some of Vallejo's flat blue to my previous mix to change the hue of the base coat. Then, while the base coat is still wet, I blot and dab on that new color. All over the stones, I'm working randomly as I move across each surface. I'm also hitting the rocks on the upper ledge where Winnie will be standing with these colors as well. After letting the base colors dry, I break out my dry brush and mix a bit of Citadel's Celestra Gray with a dot of Abaddon Black. I then gently start to dry brush that on all of the rocks, which you can start to see here as it pulls the texture and details out of the dark base coat. I then take a bit of pure Celestra Gray and I dry brush that on the rocks, focusing on the upper areas and highest parts to really bump up that contrast. With the wood and rocks done, I need to get the normal ground painted up along with the pond area. For the ground, I'm base coating that in Vallejo's flat earth. I'm then going to be taking Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil and randomly applying splotches of both those colors all over the ground. I'm not too worried about getting it perfect since a good portion of the ground is going to be covered up later on with snow. Now for the pond. The pond isn't deep physically in real life, as you can obviously see, but I do want to paint it up so that it looks deeper than it really is. To start, I'm going to be taking some more of that base coat that I used on the rocks and I'm dotting that around the middle of the pond area. Then, as I get further away from the center of the pond, I'm going to start to lighten up with a lighter blue color, and then at the shoreline, I'm going to try to make that closer to a gray color. Working from one color to the next while everything is still wet helps a lot. You can wet blend from one color to the next, which helps to ease the transition from darker to lighter as we move from the center to the edge. After the paint in the pond dries, I'm coming in with some of AK Interactive's transparent water gel to seal the base of the pond. This is going to take 24 hours to dry, but I'm hoping because I did it in such a thin layer, I can have it dry faster than that. In the meantime, I have more that I can work on before pouring the water itself. Now, I want to add the snow, but I have to wait because I need that resin to be poured and cured as I'll be putting snow around the rim of the pond itself. I can't do that while it's still curing. So instead, I'm going to focus my attention towards the biggest part of this diorama and what I think is really going to elevate it. And that is making an awesome, realistic looking spell for Big Thicky to be firing at Winnie. You're probably asking, how does one make a realistic, amazing spell, Samuel? And I'd say, with LED filaments, of course. I thought it would be really cool to give this beholder an actual ray of magic or something that he's blasting at Winnie up on the ledge. And to accomplish this vision, vision? Because beholder? The big eye? No? You didn't see what I did there? I'm going to be making a simple circuit hidden around the back of this diorama. I want one LED up near his little eye that the beholder could be shooting down towards Winnie, and the other one I want to have looking like it's blasted into the rock right next to Winnie up on the ledge. I am by no means an electrician, but I have done a bit of soldering work before, and this is a super basic circuit that I'm trying to put together. One end of the LED filaments is positive, and the other is negative. After soldering the filament to the wire, I then slip some insulation wrapping over all of that and use a lighter to heat shrink it down to protect the wire. It's always a bit painful to drill into a nicely finished portion of any diorama, but those are just sacrifices that I am willing to make.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Besides, I'm going to be adding some explosion effects around the rock LED later on to kind of hide the damage that I've done and also make it look cooler. Now for the other LED, the one that's going to be up by the eye of the beholder, I considered drilling into the actual eye of the model and running the wires up and around and down the beholder, hiding them behind the diorama. But he's just too dang cool to permanently attach to the diorama, and I'm actually going to wire the LED near his little eye stalk, as if it's just left his eye after being casted. And instead, I'm going to attach it to the wooden structure and hide the wiring that way. The I-beam up by the wooden structure that I ended up not attaching to the beholder was wired similarly to the one on the rock. I bent the tips of the filament, soldered them to the wires, and then connected everything to more wire running down the back of the wooden building. Now she ain't pretty, but she's going to get the job done. Now I can pour the pond, make the rock explosion, and apply the snow and call this baddie done. Moving on from my slightly haphazard electrical circuit creation, whatever that was, I'm going to be doing something a lot easier, which is pouring the resin for the pond. To accomplish this, I'm going to be using Mod Podge Dimensional Magic, but I'm going to be mixing it with a dot of this Prussian blue alcohol ink, along with a dot of this blue acrylic ink from Daler Rowney. I give that a little mixy poo, and then I pour it into the pond area. I'm also going to be using a toothpick to tease out the edges and ensure that it looks natural. Now, I'll be real honest. As I'm pouring this and teasing it out, it's looking way, way bluer than I thought it would. And honestly, my heart sank looking at this because it's so opaque and so blue. And now, I'm worried that I might have ruined the whole project. I'm going to be doing something a lot easier. My only hope here with the pond being so blue and so opaque is that it's just not cured yet. So when it finally cures 100% after 24 hours, hopefully it'll be more transparent. The good news is this is supposed to be a frozen over icy lake, and there's a few tips and tricks that I can do if it doesn't turn out right to make it still look good. While I'm waiting for the pond to cure, I pull out some cotton balls and start to tease one apart into some vague explosion shapes. I want it to look like an energy beam has just slammed into the rock next to Winnie and sent a chunk of the ledge flying. After getting the shape I wanted, I lightly dusted the tips of the cotton with some black spray paint to give it a darker color. I then glue that in place on the diorama. After that's in place, I paint up a few small bits of cork to look like debris, and I add that to various parts of the cotton explosion cloud. Now, let's finish the pond and add the snow. The pond did cure a bit more transparent than when I first poured it, so that's good. To wrap up the pond, I'm going to be doing two things. First, I'm going to be taking some sandpaper and I'm going to be lightly dragging that across various parts of the surface to scratch it up a bit. This is going to help convey a weathered ice look. I also use my hobby knife to add a few single scratches of different depths and lengths. The second thing that I'm going to be doing to the pond is painting up a little bit. I'm taking some thinned down Celestra Gray and a few shades of blue, and I'm adding streaks across the pond. I'm focusing a bit more on the edges, and I'm working in thin layers and adding it randomly. The next step is not only going to pull this pond together, but it's going to also pull the entire diorama together and get us that finished look. My snow mixture is pretty basic, but it looks believable as snow. My snow, I just use AK Interactive's water foam paste, and I carefully apply that all over the diorama, focusing on spots that snow could and would gather, such as rock ledges and areas of the ground. I then take this generic snow powder that I picked up from my local hobby store, and I'm going to sprinkle that on top of the paste while it's still wet. I let that sit for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to come in with some isopropyl alcohol and my homemade scenic glue, and I give all the snow a little soaking. I'm careful not to go too overboard with this, as I don't want to mess up the look of everything else. If you do have some overspill or runoff, just take a little cotton swab or a paper towel and soak it up. And with the snow applied, I paint the sides of the base black, and I'm calling this one done. Now we have an awesome base for our Frost Beholder and Monster Hunter Winnie to be fighting on. I'm quite pleased with the special effects that I was able to achieve with the cool LED filaments and the cotton ball explosion, and I think things like this not only helped me get more out of my comfort zone, but also helped to elevate my diorama. But what do you think? Does this look cool? Did I go way overboard and is this overkill? Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the diorama. And while you're down there, be sure to give this video a like. And if you have hobby friends that you think would enjoy the video and the content that I put out, go ahead and share the video with them. And if you're enjoying the content yourself, but you're not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would consider subscribing to the channel. The Minicraft fam is growing, and we would love it if you would be a part of it. That's going to do it for this one, you guys. Until next time, keep on crafting.